All right, we'll get class started here in a minute, but just so I don't forget to record. I've got this going now, and this is the prompt for today.
I'm not today. I don't think I'm today. I really hope I don't.
I got done with iPad.
Hello.
Dr.
Miss Doctor.
How are you?
All right, we've got a little therapy here at the beginning, but it's it's all about what Thoreau is talking about in his essay. So you're just writing about your worries. And while you're writing, I'm going to come by and check for annotation. So have Walden open on your desk. Sorry, the where I lived and what I lived for. It's an excerpt from Walden. There it is. Seriously?
No. Good. First two stages. Beautiful. Start from the back page.
All right, let's see what you got.
I did not do it. I am trying to catch up.
You got a big long one.
I
Okay, some points for that. You want points for the rest.
I'm going to.
Okay. We went at Spain. Okay, everyone quiet while they're working their phone now.
I have no clue. In the middle of the
First page, okay. Okay, guys, over here, quiet while you write about your worries.
because I didn't want to go.
Okay. Figure out.
We can do it. I'm gonna stand right.
Maybe you're worried about me standing right here. Okay, why don't you wrap up your sentence? And then pull out word of the day.
Everywhere you touch. Yes.
Do we still have words? Yeah, this is our last one. Or do we have two more? Okay. All right, listen up. Listen up. Okay. If you have missed a day and you did not watch the class recordings, I don't want you to be double penalized for both participation and word of the day. So if you are not on the last word today, we'll fill up this sheet today, then you need to get the words you missed from somebody. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds just to grab the word you missed from somebody.
You missed me the last one. Or the last one. Yes. Yeah. I have it somewhere.
Okay, all I want you to do is you just get the word you missed from them, write down the word. You'll have to look at the definition and find an example for yourself. I want to move on.
Wait, last time I didn't get it either.
Oh yeah, last time no one was here. What was our word? Lyric, yeah.
Tell me.
I think that was the time before. Maybe we can look into that.
Oh yes, here.
Okay, moving on. So our last word on that sheet is diocopy.
Whoa.
Oh.
Okay, is everyone with me? I'm gonna just say it out loud, the definition. You gotta write it down, all right? Okay, good. All right, diocopy is the repetition of words or phrases with only one or two words in between. The repetition of words or phrases with only one or two words in between. You are used to seeing these in songs a lot, like the chorus of a song. Sometimes when it's only like a phrase repeated over and over again, that would be an example of a diocopy. It doesn't have to have one or two words in between. It can just be repetition. Yes. That's actually something really specific called polysyndeton. It would technically be diocopy, but like diocopy is more like, oh, what's a born in the USA, I was born in the USA, born in the USA, I was born in the USA. Yeah, yeah. Or Thoreau has one, and this is your example. Thoreau says, simplify, simplify, simplify. And that is your example.
Oh my God.
Okay, guys, I need you guys to shh. Okay, thank you. All right, but where does he say that in the essay? I didn't circle it. Where is it? Thank you.
Oh my God.
Yes, simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I messed it up. Don't listen to me.
Oh.
Oh wait, I don't like the same thing.
There it is. All right, what do you guys got written down? You doing it? All right, good. Sorry, messed it up. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. There we go. All right, so he could have said just simplicity. Everyone open up the Thoreau. Look on page 297. And it's at the top of page 297 of the Thoreau. It says, our life is frittered away by detail. What does it mean to fritter away something? Emily?
I think of like.
Yes, and it's like piece by piece, absolutely, and it's like without even thinking about it too. So it's like slowly just piece by piece going away and we're not even recognizing it. So our life is frittered away by detail. An honest man has hardly need to count more than his 10 fingers, or in extreme cases, he may add his 10 toes and lump the rest. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. In the midst of this chopping sea of civilized life, such are the clouds and storms and quicksands and 1,001 items to be accounted for that a man has to live if he would not founder and go to the bottom and not make his port at all by dead reckoning. And he must be a great calculator indeed who succeeds. Simplify, simplify. There's another diocopy. So first of all, what does he mean in that little section about simplicity? What does he want you to do? Yeah,
I think he's kind of saying he wants us to like simplify our lives and just like live easily. Don't worry about a million things. Just like focus on like one or two things at a time. Keep it happy.
Yeah. Yeah, and when he says at a time, does that mean like this morning you could worry about brushing your teeth, getting to school on time, and maybe your first period homework? And now, right now, you're worrying about learning about Thoreau and talking to Maddie and and doing your daily prompt. And then this afternoon, you're supposed to be thinking about soccer and I don't know what else do you guys do. Fortnite, is that still a thing? And going to bed on time, right? Like, is he saying like focus on a few things at once, or what is he actually saying? Live your life totally is part of it, but yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think he's definitely talking about that. He's talking about it in material terms, but he's also talking about it in terms of like what you actually do with your time. So he is saying that don't just worry about 2 or 3 things at a time and you can kind of like cycle through those. Like devote your life to 2 or 3 things and that should be it. Right? So if you're like, right now I'm in school, government told me I have to be, he wouldn't like that idea, but the government has decided I've got to commit to school, or your parents or whatever, that should be your commitment. Thoreau wouldn't like the way that our school has like all the extracurriculars, like here's FCCLA and here's soccer and here's, being student body president. He would be like, that's too complicated. Just simplify it. Study, study all day and that should be your thing. Or do soccer and make food. And those should be your 2 things. He wants you to simplify your concerns.
But I get that, but I still have 7 classes at school. So
That's true. That's true. Oh, that thing keeps coming down. Yeah, so I think that he so from what I understand about transcendental school, I think he would be a fan of it because it is very self-guided. So you come to school for that day, you got 8 hours in a single classroom, because it's not like in the 1800s you had 8 periods of different subjects, right? So you'd come to school, you have 8 hours, and it would be like, devote yourself to learning Greek philosophy for this year, and now I'm going to like devote myself to that subject. And it was really self-guided, and it was really all about learning your own, like figuring out what your own relationship is to those things. So go out into nature, examine nature. They would actually take their classrooms out into nature quite a lot, and then kind of like sit with these things and figure out what it means for you. So Thoreau was like a very learned person. Like he studied a lot. He spent a lot of his time when he was out in this cabin in the woods. Oh, I forgot to tell you about him. I will in a second. He spent a lot of that time like thinking and reading about things. But he was like, let's devote to that one thing. Yeah, so he would really hate, I think modern life has gotten even more intense than it was in the 1860s. And I'm not talking about like social media and all of that. Obviously, the transcendentalists would hate that. But just the amount of things we care about, they would be upset by. Like Thoreau would say, devote your life. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. And that's going to make for a happier life.
Diocopy says, as for work, we haven't any consequence.
Any of any? Technically, I think it would. Yeah. It's not quite the spirit of Diocopy, though. Spirit of Diocopy is almost like somebody is like trying to get you to memorize that word, so they're repeating it over and over again. And that one, it's kind of has different meanings in each expression. Because what did you say again? It was as for work.
As for work, we haven't any of any.
Yeah, so it's we haven't any work of any consequence, So it's kind of meaning different things. So it's more like if it's like the chorus of a song. Were you gonna say something, Emily?
I Well, I feel like you can answer it, but what are the?
So a diocopy is going to be repetition in a row. So you can't have it be like simplicity, simplicity, and then at the end of the paragraph, simplicity, simplicity again. Like the diocopy is going to be in a row. And then you are going to only have 1 or 2 words ever in between repetitions. That's why I said born in the USA. I was born in the USA. That would count as a diocopy. You guys know that song? Or what's a song that you guys listen to that has a bunch of repetition in the chorus?
I wasn't born in the US.
Oh, okay. Well, good. Then there we go. But like, I feel like there's like, in my head, I'm just like Gucci, 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 Gucci. But that was from a long time ago. Oh well. So repetition though of like short phrases. Okay, so tell me this. Why do you think it's so important that he repeats it? Now that we figured out what the argument is, why does he repeat this word over and over again?
So we can make sure he deserves more praise.
Okay, so
We know that that's the message of simplicity.
awesome. Repetition, like diocopy, is always going to be about emphasis. Oh my gosh, like Jake and Josh. And memory. So it's like if you read this essay, the one word you're going to remember from it is simplicity, which is important for him. It kind of like preaches his message because he wants you to take like all these ideas and that you have in life and narrow that down to like a simple life purpose. So it kind of works for him to say, look, if you're only going to remember one thing from my essay, let's remember the word simple. Specifically though, so that kind of works for all repetitions. Specifically, why repeat this word? Okay, good. So repeating the thesis over and over again. And the thesis is just simplicity. Yeah, Eli?
It's also because the guy with a really roundabout way of like thinking and speaking, he goes off on really weird tangents. So he has to come back to this or we're not going to understand it.
Good.
He has to simplify his own writing. He doesn't.
Yes, tangents back to simplicity. And I think that kind of is what he's kind of saying we do too. He's saying we go off on these tangents and we start worrying about so many things. Let's move back and go back to this really nice idea of simplicity. That's the other thing is when you repeat this word over and over again, it starts to seem very, very appealing in the way that it's like, I've been reading this convoluted maybe essay about lots of different ideas, and then he just says simplicity, and I'm like, oh yeah, that would be nice. Yeah.
He also kind of right too, like uses the same to make a big idea, make it smaller and more manageable.
Yeah. Make big idea more manageable. All right. Awesome. Write down some effects now of using the diocopy for Thoreau if you haven't already. Everybody's gotten them down? No, a few people are writing them down. Okay. Yeah. Okay, make sure you're writing down not just the general effects, the emphasis and memory idea, but also the specific effects about why repeat this word simplicity in this essay. Okay, then you can put away word of the day, but we're still going to talk about this Thoreau a little bit more. So Henry David Thoreau, actually quite a wealthy guy. He made his money in pencils. So he figured out a way to center the lead in pencils in his pencil factory. And it was very successful. And so he owned this pencil factory and actually did like really well financially. And based on that and his experience though, working in this factory or owning this factory, he decided that he wanted to kind of get away from the modern world. I think it's so interesting that this guy who was so involved in industrialization in a pencil factory was like, I don't want any more of it. I'm going to go into the woods now. So he talked to his friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson. They were buddies. And Emerson let Thoreau come onto his property. Emerson had a big chunk of property in the woods. And he said, you can come and you can live in the woods on my property. And so Thoreau went out and he built his own cabin. It took him, what he's gonna say in the video, I'm gonna show you. He built his own cabin though. He figured out a way to sustain himself by growing beans. So he would fish a lot. He would hunt a little bit. He wasn't a super successful hunter. And then he would grow beans. And so he basically like lived this very simple life out there in the woods, reading and studying when the light was out. He didn't have electricity though, and he would just sit there and write his book. He ended up writing the book called Walden. Have you guys heard of Walden before we start talking about it in here? It's a really beautiful book, especially if you're an introvert at all. Like, it is the most appealing existence. You just read about this guy out in the woods reading books and like loving life and not having to talk to annoying people. It's really nice. But he lived out in the woods for 2 years, he says in that book. Now, technically, he was within walking distance of civilization. So every couple of weekends, he'd go back into town and Emerson would feed him a nice meal, or his aunt would feed him a really nice meal. So he doesn't mention that in the book Walden, but like technically he wasn't always out there like by himself for 2 full years. But that was kind of the idea, and that was the ideal. Like, he would have liked to be able to do it completely on his own. Yes, but then he only wanted to live in isolation for 2 years, and that's when he wrote the story. But I think he actually lived out there for 6 years at least. So, but then after the 2 years, he was okay with just being a part of the community too. Yeah, basically. Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of money, so he was able to do this and then get back into it. And yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it wasn't out of
beans. What nutritional value does beans have?
protein. They got what you need.
But just beans.
Well, he grew other vegetables and stuff too, but he's very concerned about the beans in Walden.
I know, but that's rice and beans. Just beans.
He would get,
You like over them.
he would buy small bits of supplies from town. So technically, I think he would buy a little bit of flour and cornmeal.
But I mean, overwhelmingly.
But overwhelmingly, it was beans and vegetables. Yep.
Is that it? Is the same thing, like grapefruit?
You just soak them and eat them. I don't know. I think he said he'd buy a little lard from town too, so you flavor it with the lard, and then yeah.
Like a bucket of flies.
He
Sounds like a red flag.
maybe not in the 1860s. He never got married. He was always kind of just this introverted, quiet guy. He wrote a lot. And the other famous story about him, you guys are actually going to read this for next time. He wrote this essay called Civil Disobedience. And the reason is because he came back from Walden Pond. He was out there living the good life for like 6 years. He comes back into town one day, and the constable stops him and says, "You didn't pay your taxes. Why haven't you paid your taxes in 6 years?" And Thoreau says, specifically, he didn't pay this specific tax because it went to funding the militia, and he felt like, I want nothing to do with a government that supports slavery and supports the Mexican-American War. Those were his 2 beefs. And so he said, I'm not paying my taxes. I'm not going to do it. Like, that would be supporting what I think is evil. So they arrested him, and he spent the night in jail. And he got the idea for Civil Disobedience. It's an amazing essay. Don't let this next fact that I tell you detract from the fact that it's an amazing essay. But he only spent 1 night in jail because the next morning his aunt came and bailed him out of jail and paid his taxes. But he was trying to rebel against the government by not paying anything. So that's like the kind of duty is. I'm going to show you this really goofy in the way that it's like this old video. Did you guys ever know the show? At this point, no way, but have you ever heard of this old house? It was like HGTV. Can you remember it? It was like HGTV before that existed. So it was just on PBS. This guy named Bob Vila would like fix up houses. So we're gonna watch him going into the woods and seeing a recreation of Thoreau's house so that you can see what it looks like. And I want to think about how you would do in that situation. So just with a partner for 1 minute, just a person next to you or two people next to you, I want you to talk about what you think some of the appeals are for living in nature, like what would be nice about living the way that Thoreau lived for 2 years, and what would be really hard about it. So just talking about what you like about it and what you wouldn't like about it. Go for it.
If I had a bear or someone, I would be my really house.
This isn't even your problem.
Okay, let's talk together now. Okay, let's talk together now. So just in sort of thinking about the pros and cons of his way of life, and you can think about his way of life in a lot of ways: living alone, living in the woods, in nature, being self-sufficient, living a life where you're just writing and reading. Like, you can think about all the different aspects of his life. What do you find very appealing about this as a pro? Yeah.
No people.
You like that part?
I hate people.
Oh no, why?
Just like people are cool. Like, I can come to school and talk to people.
Yeah.
It's fun, but like being around people all the time can just suck.
Okay. I'm hearing, just in the way you're saying suck, means that it's like draining a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. No people. So like energy wasted on people sometimes. So maybe you get a break from that for a second. Sophia? Break from expectations. And what would that be like?
Like,
Oh.
like what you wear, how you look, what you're doesn't matter.
Okay, cool. So what I'm hearing from that is partly it's like, it's okay to have expectations of yourself, maybe.
Yeah, but like outside expectations.
You're saying like impose expectations that like you haven't bought into
Yeah.
necessarily.
You're just doing stuff for you and not worried about what others think.
Okay, fine. So I'm gonna put this word up here, but I don't mean it to be negative. You get to live selfishly though. You get to live with you as your own concern.
I think a better way to phrase that would be to live for yourself.
Okay,
You don't live for other people or for family or for friends. You have your needs you provide for, your wants, and no one else influences that. It's purely what you want to be.
okay, good. So it's like living for yourself without like influences.
Yes.
Do you guys get a chance to do that very often? Like, you're at your age, you get the house to yourself for a long period of time.
It's your expectations to do things in the house.
Yeah.
That's
there's
true.
like,
Even
oh,
just
like,
having
oh,
the house,
all
there's
these
things to do. I got to do that this last weekend because my husband was out of town for 3 days, and it's awesome. There's good things about having, being married. I'm not saying saying that it's like I want him gone all the time. But like having to, just being able to make your spur of the moment choices whenever you want. And it helps that I'm an adult and I bought that house. And so like, it really is like on me what I want to do. Still not what Thoreau would want, because I still have to like work and provide all these materialistic things, blah, blah, blah. But to live without influence, like to say, right now I want to watch Gilmore Girls and get 10 minutes into Gilmore Girls and say, actually, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to paint, and just be able to do what you want. It's an amazing feeling. Jackson?
One thing that kind of comes with the first two is like especially on our side, like there's like an expectation people have, like everyone has to have, like we all devote a lot of energy to like putting ourselves in the world. And when you're kind of by yourself, you have so much energy with kind of like energy you spend on like people, like living yourselves. Like you can kind of let your energy, and you can spend your speed. You can kind of do like what you will instead of spending your energy on projecting yourself.
Oh, yeah. It's like no performative quality at all. Like, because we all perform for each other, even when we know each other really, really well. There's at least some little bit of performance we're putting on. But if you're alone in the woods for 2 years, like that completely gets to go away for a while. And all that energy you would be expending on that gets to go to you're like thinking about your own thing. Emily, and then to Jacob, and then to Keegan.
Responsibility, because if there's no one else to do your one thing, things like that, you have to do that on your own, otherwise you're A, gonna starve, B, stuff like that.
Yeah. So it creates this personal growth then, but it would also create growth in like practicalities. Like you would have to learn how to do all of that stuff too. So you would grow like in your knowledge.
So it would like, I feel like just thinking about this, that it's like, oh, you do what you want every single day. That's a lazy life, but you're actually, I feel like, less.
Yeah.
It's like you're gonna find sincere motivation. You do the things that no one else is forcing you to.
Oh, I like that.
You don't
Sincere motivation. I like that a lot. Jacob.
That's what I was gonna say.
Sincere motivation.
Awesome. That you don't really have to please anyone. You can do it for you, and then you get even more satisfaction of doing it because you're proud of yourself.
So no pleasing others equals like also a sincere satisfaction too. All right, awesome. Keegan?
I feel like no one truly knows like themselves because of how much an influence society has on us. Like when we're like away from that, like you really get to like find out more about yourself, I guess, because you get to find out like your interests that you like. Because a lot of people just do stuff because everyone else likes it, You get to find out like your own personality more in depth, I guess.
So it's like interests and personality are going to
Yeah.
be more sincere because someone else isn't forcing them on you. Okay, Emily?
This is kind of a concept, but I'm curious if living in isolation requires such a few years, that cause insanity?
Okay, that's what I want to know now too. That's a good place to move on.
I don't know.
So
what does that do?
we all had a little slice of this in 2020 when we went into lockdown. It wasn't really alone. You were with your families. And it wasn't a choice. Yeah. Okay. So that makes a huge difference too, right? But what could be some of the cons about living in isolation? Would you actually go crazy? Let's put that up here. Would you go out of your mind?
I think you'd lose some of your,
Because
yeah,
again,
social
it's
skills
just-
and just, you'd lose society or lose, the social part of society.
Okay. So
It's entirely
you'd lose
bad.
these opportunities to
I think
dash.
You'd lose certain skills that you would have in society than you would have in isolation.
So it's not only social skills, but also the skills that society helps us build.
Yes.
Okay, Josh?
You still have to keep going back to society to get stuff like that.
Okay, so you do need society, and I think his experiment kind of shows us that too, that when you actually kind of look into what his real day-to-day was, like there were times, yes, for the most part, he was living alone, more alone than, any of us have ever been before, but he also needed things from town, and it talked about that in the video. He needed people's help to put up the frame. So if he had never had those connections, that would have been a real problem for how to get, his house even built. So there are like practicalities. Jackson?
I think the other thing is he wasn't fully alone, like when it attacked. And if you were alone, you would definitely get lonely.
Yeah.
Like, even during the pandemic, there were people who like I knew, and I myself was more people like who don't like people, but like when you're truly by yourself, you do it. And it's also in like some movies, like a space movie, people go like I don't know,
Right.
Mars, and, like there's this feeling of like with Interstellar, like the guy in the ice planet, like there's no human, like there's a listen to them.
Yeah. And you might lose what it means to be human. Because we are pack animals. Like we live in societies, we've lived in societies since we first started evolving, right? Like we work together as little communities. Our communities now are like way too big, but like there is something to be said about learning from other people, bouncing ideas off of other people, and actually having that outlet. And you're right, like all of our films that are about isolation, usually that person goes a little nuts, and often they invent a community, like Wilson in Castaway, right? Yeah. Or in The Martian, like he has to like be talking to a camera so that he like is feeling like he's actually talking to someone. There's all those like instances of how we're desperate to sort of reach out. Sophia?
Things. First, I feel like you get bored.
Yeah, why is that?
Just because, like, if you have nothing going on around you and he's saying he's only living at the pace of life, you get bored. Especially doing the same thing over and over again every day. And also, like, when people are like really bad, they send them to isolation, like as a form of punishment.
Uh-huh.
And they definitely go crazy. But still being alone for that long.
Yeah.
Hard.
But why do you think it's different?
Okay, so like the difference between going out in the woods and providing for something like in an isolation chamber is like you in an isolation chamber you have no stimulation period. Like it's your brain and that's it.
Right.
In the woods you have all of nature around you, your needs, everything's happening, like you're in a space and ecosystem you're designed for. Isolation is you're removing all of reality from somebody, like as far as you get to just in like depriving them from any sort of reality. So it's we think of like going out in the woods have nothing to do as the same as that, but there's lots to like providing for your basic needs out in the world. Like when you go camping,
Right.
you learn a lot more depth out in nature. More things are presented to you. If you're in a little gray cell, you're gonna go crazy because there's nothing beautiful.
Yeah, so it's about the stimulation, not necessarily about the communication then. And it's about
Yeah.
having like enough intellectual stimulation as you are going through your day. There's also something to be said here again about the choice of it, actually choosing to go do that thing. So
Yeah.
you're taking ownership over your other thing rather than it being a punishment, maybe. Keegan?
So there's a show me and my family watched called Alone. And it's basically where, where a ton of people compete to see who can be in isolation in nature for the longest.
Uh-huh.
And it's basically this, like they like film themselves and they have their own camera equipment. And you can see over like the season how like some people slowly go crazy. Like, they'll like have breakdowns in the show and like they'll like tap out and like stuff like that. And, like
Yeah.
it's just like a really interesting show to like see how these people evolve like when they're just like completely alone.
So what do we do with our emotions when we are alone? It sounds like sometimes that's the problem.
It like it takes over because when you're fully alone, you can't really like you can either work or think basically.
Yeah.
So like you're completely alone with your mind, and that's why like you learn more about yourself, but also your emotions can like overcome you sometimes, and like because nothing else is really distracting you other than work.
Yeah.
So yeah, you just like learn a lot more about your emotions.
And maybe you're learning too much about yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Like maybe part of it is like I used to think I was one way, and that's kind of breaking down for me now. And what do I do with that information?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. JD, you were gonna say something?
Okay, I was gonna say, it all comes down to like how much you have, right? Because in like that Alone show, I remember watching dude who like, he got everything perfect. He was set, he could have won the whole thing, which got bored. He's like, I want to go from my family to my kids, right? So it's like, it all comes down on what you have to do. You just got bored, you have nothing else to do.
Yeah.
So like, if you're in nature, so if you like hunting and fishing enough, then you'll be fine.
Got it.
But if you don't have enough to do, you're just gonna be bored and go crazy.
And I think that happened a little bit during lockdown too. Like people who had really rich, interesting hobbies, they did great. They just had time to do that, you know. But for people who were like, no, like my hobby is like watching TV and hanging out with my friends. Like I don't have something like, you know, specifically that I like doing that can be done alone. They really suffered. So maybe that's part of the learning too much about yourself, like learning that there's not much to yourself, and that would be rough to do. Emily, and then to JJ.
I feel like along with the idea of like there is I don't know. I think of it as choice and freedom, because if you're in this little cell, just you and your mind, most likely you're forced to be there, and then you're gonna be fighting against that idea of I don't have to be here, why am I here? Stuff like
Yeah.
that. Whereas if you're moving out to a little cabin, you probably chose to be there and therefore could choose to go back.
Okay, good. So having that choice there's a part of me, and just because I like to play devil's advocate, but I'm like thinking about it and I'm like, would it have been easier if lockdown was a choice? Because for me, it kind of was. Like I had family that was pressuring me to not be in lockdown, you know, to not, don't take it that seriously, just come hang out, right? And so there was that choice there, but I had to choose to then live in the lockdown, and there was something hard about that too. And I wonder if Thoreau had that, where his aunt was like, come to Thanksgiving dinner, and he was like, no, I'm doing this thing in the woods, you know? And I wonder if that made it easier or harder to commit to that.
Well, I also think it's the motivation behind that.
Yeah.
Because he was doing it just to get away from society and stuff. Whereas, I don't know your particular situation.
Right. Right.
And
So
so.
it still isn't really a
And
choice.
it still is the societal pressure behind it.
Right.
Because there was a lot of societal pressure regarding COVID, saying that you have to do this. So I think that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. Yeah. JJ?
She nailed it.
Okay. Here are our pros and cons. So one thing I was thinking too is that like, because we are social creatures, because we do grow up in social groups and you are introduced into this world into a social group, like we need social interactions to develop. I don't know if you guys have ever seen like case studies of kids that haven't had that social interaction. Like there was one really famous case in France where this boy was basically grew up in the woods, and he was called the wolf boy. I don't know. It was from a very long time ago, from like the 1930s, I want to say, and didn't develop any human language. It didn't develop any sort of like human like intellectual skills. And because of that, it's not like your brain just develops, you know, on its own and that you'll be human. It's like you lose that human part of yourself if you're out alone too often. And I think that's really important for teenagers too, right? Like you're in that age where like your whole thing is that you're moving away from family groups into social groups, and that's supposed to happen for our development. So if you miss out on that, like what do you become? Yeah, Jane?
I think he would start communicating. I saw his first human.
The boy in the woods, he did a lot of screaming and yelling and like.
I feel like he just started like grunting or.
Yeah, have you seen Wild Thornberries, that cartoon? Oh man, all my references are too old. Oh well, yeah, I think it was like a lot of just like noises. Yeah, like an animal. Emily?
So, whose idea was it to talk this shit out?
An abusive parents.
And people just let him?
Yeah, he found a way to survive by like stealing stuff, and yeah.
So that
I don't know I need to learn the details of this story before I tell you further. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna learn more. I watched the movie on it like 20 years ago, and now I gotta remember. Okay, so the other part of his idea then. So part of it is living alone, right? But the other part is this simplicity thing that he's talking about. And he says that he would like you to just choose 2 or 3 things that you care about. 2 or 3 things to commit to. So this starts the next part of our discussion. Talk with that person that you've been talking to. What 2 to 3 things out of all your responsibilities, if you were to live like Thoreau tells you to, which 2 or 3 things would you dedicate yourself to? And you don't have to imagine that this is occurring in the woods, like right now, if you were to dedicate yourself to 2 to 3 things, what would they be?
Just sort of the way how. I would examine like why in society we kind of are.
Oh my gosh, I'm a chiropractor.
I need a circle.
Yeah.
Is he cat?
Like, no one likes somebody. Why do you feel like, I'm assuming you realize I said, like, why do we talk to people that we don't enjoy talking?
Okay, now I want you to think about this. So if you've identified your 2 or 3 things, now think about your life the way it is. What percentage of your life do you actually spend on those 2 to 3 things that you just identified should be your priority? All right, was one of anyone's 2 to 3 things? School, learning, education? No one wants to dedicate any of their time to school or education? Oh, okay, that was one of yours, okay. Learning, and it doesn't have to be in this institution.
Like, let's say like.
All right, let's talk about this one together. Let's talk about this one together. So if school wasn't included in your 2 to 3 priorities, like what are you doing here? Right? It's because you have all these outside influences that are making you live a certain way, correct? And I think a lot of people would think that about work too. A lot of people living their adult lives are like, I wouldn't dedicate myself to like being, my husband's a project manager. I wouldn't dedicate myself to being like a project manager for e-learning. Like, what am I doing with these priorities? But you've got all of these different responsibilities that are forcing you to like take that on, right? But if you could live completely free, the way that Thoreau says you should be able to, what would be your 2 to 3 priorities, and how much percentage right now do they take up of your life? Does anyone want to share their 2 to 3 priorities? Eli?
I want to make things just in general.
Okay.
And then live for myself, like actually structure my life in a way that makes me happy.
Uh-huh.
And then throw this stuff and throw it at people so I can irritate them. I want to get a reaction out of people. That's
You
what
want to
I
irritate people, you want to make things.
No, like get a
and you-
reaction out of them, see how they react to things that I do.
Okay, that makes sense. So part of yours would not be living in the woods then.
Maybe still like living in isolation away from people, but like being able to at least one-sidedly like influence them.
Yes, okay.
See how they react.
And actually Thoreau was all about that because he was writing and he was publishing. So he wanted to, he wanted people to read those things he was making. Yeah. Shh. Okay.
I told your husband was a rapper.
He is, but not for his job. But that would be one of his 2 or 3 things. Like he doesn't get to make money, but he only gets to spend like a couple hours a day, maybe writing, you know, or performing.
So what?
Yeah, he's a rapper. Thanks. Yeah, if you want to hear his stuff, his name is Rhyme Time. He's on Spotify, but it's not school appropriate. How did you like it? He's pretty good, right? Like it's not when your English teacher who looks like me tells you her husband's a rapper, you have low expectations. Yeah. All right, here. Let's revisit this. Okay, so let's look at the pros of simplifying. Okay, so the pros of simplifying, of dedicating your life to only like 2 or 3 things and knocking out all the others. What would be the pros of doing that? Yeah.
I feel like you go insane by worrying about all this.
Why would you be worried?
Yeah, because you've dedicated.
So where does that anxiety come from? Where's the
So, am I good enough?
Just you.
Okay,
sense?
so you're saying,
Not like not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Like self-expectation?
yeah.
You're like, yeah. sounds right.
Like, should you be working just for yourself?
Yeah.
Impossible to escape.
Okay, so
You're always gonna want to change your.
what was that, Maddie?
You're always gonna want to change your.
Okay, so over here in cons 2, it's like we want variety. We want to change. But is that like by the hour or is that by the year? Because Thoreau would be okay with, Maddie, Thoreau would be okay with like changing things around, right? So is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about like moment to moment wanting to change? Okay, so maybe it's like we actually don't know ourselves that well.
Yeah.
So what do we dedicate to and what do we leave behind, Maggie?
Okay, so once you're dedicated to something, you're gonna wanna get better at it, but once you get really good at it, then you're like, what's the point? Everything is a challenge when you're in society, and so if you don't have that challenge, then how are you supposed to like stay dedicated to it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but have you ever heard like that phrase that, I don't know the phrase, but that idea that like the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know.
Yeah.
So like the better you get at something, oftentimes that means you realize how not good you are. Like people who I listen to them play the piano and they're amazing at, and I'm like, you are a master pianist, you know? They might say to me like, I'm nowhere near as good as all these other people. I have so much further to go. So maybe it's, yeah.
And people help you like realize that, like they realize, like they help you realize that you're good at this and you
Oh, okay.
get better at it, but then like, I think when you're on your own and you're dedicated to it, then you're like, why am I doing this? It's not good.
Okay.
But if people are like, no, you're actually getting good. Like for me, it's like for running when my coaches are like, we're getting better. And I'm like, oh, I am getting better. But then like for me, on my own,
Okay.
it's like harder to look at that.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily about the simplicity part, but it's about this idea that Thoreau's ideas might not work together. Yes, alone plus simplicity is the problem. Yeah.
Right. I also like your thoughts could like really change everything. You like your thoughts can go on and on. Your brain is so complicated that you can like what is and all that. It just makes it so much more complicated than it should be.
Okay. Yeah. Emily?
So I think it's you have to have a mindset change. Like, and I think that'd be hard to not like mindset. Don't have other people that help you shift that mindset. But if you're living a simple life with the joy of a simple life, you're gonna soon realize that comparison is the thief of joy.
Okay.
And that it's not going to.
So it could be to get rid of some of those comparisons. Brent, did you have something about that?
I did with my basically.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, great minds do.
Jackson?
My comment is, selfishness. Because when you're, I'm pretty sure no one here said like to think of folks and I think it'd be like school.
Yeah.
But one thing is in life is that you have to do things you don't like. You have to talk to people that you disagree with.
Yeah. And why is that? Guys, I need everyone to quiet while they're.
You have to go through things you don't like, and do things you don't like. When you're only doing something you want, you don't get those experiences. Because like you've been in
Yeah.
school, most people fail in school, but there's value in what you learn in school. So
Yeah.
when you're only focusing on one thing, there's so much more you're missing out.
So
But
it's
you might not-
requiring, it's also requiring like a really high level of maturity to be able to dedicate yourself to things that maybe you don't find like joy in every moment, but you see the value of, you know? Yeah, go ahead.
And the other thing, is saying, like, there's no comfort in the growth. Like you have to kind of grow more when you're
Yeah, and it takes so much more like maturity again and knowing yourself even to get to that place. So maybe the problem with this idea of simplicity is that we're coming at it from a place where we're sitting in a society that has a ton of expectations on us. And also you're coming at it from a place where you're teenagers and you're not quite sure what you're supposed to do yet. So it's hard to know what to dedicate yourself to. Right? And then
I feel
Jacob.
like you wouldn't really be able to feel joy because everything you just be doing things like you want to do, and like I feel like I'm like happier when I'm not at school because I can like be like, oh wow, I was like really stressed at school and now
Yeah.
I'm happy because I'm doing something I want to do.
So it creates that difference in the
Yeah.
emotions. If you
have
never
to-
had bad,
Yeah, you have to find something you didn't like to do, and then you basically figure out where you started.
yeah. Okay. JJ, what were you gonna say?
I feel like, so this is us going in out of society.
Yeah.
Like changing a mindset. I feel like it would be impossible not to think of what life was before. So it would
Okay.
never be beneficial. No matter how good you do outside of the world, it would never be beneficial because you're always thinking of how happy you might be if you were in society again.
So the problem is like our psychology of the grass is always greener and trying to like have everything at once.
Yeah.
Keegan and then to Katie.
So are you talking about how, are we always focused on his priorities?
Thoreau would say dedicate your life to these 2 to 3 priorities. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you can't like sometimes have to read the bean plot, you know, but you're dedicating your life to these things. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, for me, I don't have any priorities in my life, like at all.
Okay.
So I just feel like it would be more of living if you don't have priorities, and that's kind of a pro, because like, you're not focused on anything, you can just kind of like, I don't know, live until you die, basically.
Okay, I think that's Emerson too, right? Like, I think we're finding a place where Thoreau and Emerson kind of disagree with each other because Emerson's like, live according to your whims. When you feel like, you know, doing something in the moment, like, go do that thing. And Thoreau would say more live with purpose and have these 2 to 3 purposes. Yeah, yeah. So you're more into Emerson's side of things. Katie?
I just think like a pro is like kind of like what has like more purpose in life. Instead of like some people like have a really hard time like finding that and like
Yeah.
struggling with that mentality. It's just like, okay, now I have something to work for through my life. And
Yeah, and it kind of
Good.
creates that sort of overarching meaning then for your life that so many people are really struggling to find. Okay, I think I'm gonna move on and do one last thing. You won't be able to fully finish it, but you'll need your Chromebooks for this one. Pull out your Chromebook. And open up the Canvas page for today. All right, open the Chromebook. Is that the part I have to say? Okay, and log in.
It's like one of those science lessons. Yeah. Make a peanut butter cupcake.
Luke, do you not have yours today?
Oh, yeah, I just have.
Okay, that'll work.
Did you open the bag first? I'm sure the list
You are going to find the assignment called Thoreau Walden Arguments. How are we doing with the login? Is it so slow? How are we doing over here with the login? Oh, that's a cool video, right? The one that I was driving for. Yeah. All right, did you find it yet?
We're still loading.
Still loading, okay.
Which one are we going to?
You're going to the module for today, and then the assignment is called Thoreau Walden Argument. You're going to open up that Google Doc and make a copy for yourself. So let me just explain what I did here. I wrote statements that would be completely the opposite of what Thoreau would say. So I said, technological progress is one important way that humanity improves itself. I said, we should foster many different interests and responsibilities in our lives. I said, we learn more from communicating with others than we do from being alone. And I said, we should be well informed about the world we live in. He's so like anti-news. He doesn't want you to go out and like doom scroll all the time. So these are 4 statements that I believe seem perfectly logical. Like they are definitely arguments that people have, but they are against what Thoreau says in his essay. And I think if you were to put things the way Thoreau says, they also seem perfectly logical. So I think what I did with this pros and cons thing up here was to try and help you see that like his ideas are appealing, and yet in certain circumstances they probably wouldn't work at all, and yet in some certain circumstances they would be the way to improve the world, and so on. It's complicated. So under the column that says what you say, that's what we're going to be able to do for today, and then we'll have the discussions next time. So under what you say, I want you to just think about the truthfulness of those 4 statements and write whether or not you agree with it, and then give one specific example that supports whether you agree with it or not. So if, for example, you say technological progress is an important way that we improve ourselves, you could talk about the way that certain medical enhancements have made it so that we live much longer lives, and therefore we have more time to develop as people, and then more time to develop as a species. You know, you're trying to find one specific example for why it might be true or false, whatever you think. Okay, and you don't have to go all one way or the other. You can kind of find some gray areas there too. Does anyone have any questions now about which assignment I'm talking about, or what you're supposed to do? Well, so I was gonna do, we have 10 minutes. Yes, let's do that. Let's do in your normal groups that you work in, just with the people next to you. Just you can talk about what you say, and then what your group says, but you won't be able yet to get into what Thoreau says, because I'm going to have you do quotes for that. So you can talk about what you say and what your group says. You guys able to find that thing? Yay, good. Half your group is gone today. Maybe it can be you 4 this time. Would that work? Or wait, no, you guys always talk together up here, huh? Never mind. I'm not gonna mess with anything. Just talk with the people around you. Okay, so for you at home, you obviously won't be able to do the group part. So just do what you say, that column. And then that is all
we are doing for today. So, I will see you next time.